For the first time in Nigeria, a highly attended conference on party politics and elections was organized by the Institute for Legislative Studies in Abuja. A former president, vice presidents, ex-governors, and legislators, serving lawmakers, and hundreds of party officials arrived at the Hilton venue to discuss how best parties and elections can be organized to sustain democracy in Nigeria. Parties are the springboards of politics, but here in Nigeria, the administration of political parties faced several challenges that threaten to undermine democratic rule. The opening speeches of the presiding officers of the National Assembly pointed to the serious problems posed by political parties to the development of democracy in Nigeria.
Under Nigeria's prevailing constitutional arrangement, no association other than a political party shall canvass for votes or sponsor any candidate in an election. In effect, therefore, politics in Nigeria cannot be played save on the platform of a political party. Political parties are thus not only the engines of our democracy, but also the key to consolidating and institutionalizing it. However, we know that in reality most of our political parties are fledgling and hardly able to stand on their feet. Many exist mainly on paper and were floated to attract the financial subventions which the 1999 Constitution hitherto guaranteed them before it was amended. Even the big ones, which control various executive and legislative arms of government, are often riven by internal convulsions, lack of cohesion, indiscipline, and a glaring absence of internal democracy. These problems have been the bane of party politics in Nigeria and have been with us since the Clifford's Constitution introduced the elective principles in 1922 and Sir Herbert Macaulay formed his Nigerian National Democratic Party in 1923. Intra-party squabbles arise mainly because political party affiliation in Nigeria is rarely anchored on ideology or any uniting and defined philosophy, but rather largely on crass optimism. This undermines the capacity of the political party to govern effectively, even after gaining political party. The internal contradictions said by the coming together of strange bedfellows breed convulsions, strife and upheavals which hamper the machinery of governance. In the most extreme of cases, as we had in the First and Second Republics, intra-party squabbles combined with inter-party conflicts to scuttle the democratic experience. Two vivid examples are the events leading to both the January 15, 1966 coup and that of December 1983. I therefore urge our distinguished discussants and panelists under these topics to focus incisively on how to strengthen our political parties.
Among the stakeholders, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the political parties are key players and critical institutions of democracy. Their philosophies and manifestos are the fulcrums around which politicking and governance should ordinarily revolve. Besides, since parties are the vehicles by which elected leaders, including legislators, get to office, they can be rightly described as the spring source. Unfortunately, the management of the nation's political parties gives us cause for concern. As it's put in Latin, nemo dat what none habet, no one can give what he does not have. Thus, unless the spring source is impartial, disciplined, ardent in observing its own rules and the rule of law in general, buoyant with ideas, populated with visionary leadership, and in fact free of impurities, then the water channels can hardly themselves be free of pollutants. Governance will atrophy, and could in fact ultimately suffer fatal setback if the process of political recruitment and galvanization become diseased. If the management of political parties degenerate to rowdy engagements, certainly the falcon will no longer hear the falconer. We should seize the opportunity of this roundtable to understand and accept our weaknesses. Once this is done, we become open to resolving them. We have the capacity to build and strengthen our structures and institutions to world standards. We can even do better than the advanced democracies because we have strong empathy for our communities. We all want to see our communities develop economically, politically, and socially. We owe it to them because we are in a privileged position to make that happen. And that can better be done where the best eagles are allowed to fly, and the legislature and the political parties work hand in hand.
Party politics in Nigeria. A discussion of party politics in Nigeria cannot be complete without discussing the legal framework that regulates it. In Nigeria, political parties are effectively under the regulatory authority of the federal government. Under item 56 of the exclusive list, formation and regulation of political parties is a matter for exclusive federal legislative competence. Furthermore, the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria contains many provisions with respect to political parties. Following from the above constitutional mandate, the National Assembly has put in place legislation to guide the conduct of political parties and elections in Nigeria in the various electoral acts passed since 1999. An international conference of this nature should examine the existing legal framework in Nigeria and advise the National Assembly on any amendments that may be necessary either in the Constitution or Electoral Act to improve on the credibility of elections and electoral practice in Nigeria. We await your recommendations in this regard, especially now that there is an effort to amend the Constitution of Nigeria. The objectives of this roundtable on political party politics in Nigeria include measures to address the problem of internal party discipline and cohesion, and the issue of intra and inter-party squabble, among others. The Electoral Act 2010, as amended, contained provisions to guide INEC and political parties to tackle these problems. Ultimately, however, the problem of party indiscipline and lack of cohesion, intra-party squabbles, and inefficient organization of political parties depends on the majority of political actors. As a matter of fact, the quality of candidates presented by political parties help in leadership recruitment, and it is evident that quality leadership is essential for moving Nigeria forward.
The most important paper on party administration and elections was delivered by the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, Professor Attahir Jega. Professor Jega wondered if he has to speak as a professor of politics or the head of an electoral commission, considering the task at hand.
And in the end, I thought it's better to strike a balance, but it is a trade-off. Regrettably, from 1979 onwards, also, political parties began to reduce reliance on membership funding and rather became increasingly funded by either the so-called money bags or by incumbents who were channeling state resources to fund their parties, or by partisan government contractors, of course working with incumbents that were donating percentages of the contracts given to them in order to fund political parties. This increasingly again over time became very serious, and in fact as we moved into the late 1990s and the 2000s, increasingly you hear outrageous percentages that contractors are supposed to give to fund political parties. You hear organized interest groups, private or companies, the corporate Nigeria and so on, that were giving a lot of money as donations in court to political parties. Subsequently, individuals rich enough created, organized, and funded their own parties, paying little if any attention to party organizational structures or membership mobilization. In fact, once the funding structure changed, then membership seemed to no longer be important, because you can pay for members, you can rent a crowd for campaign rallies, you can pay for people to come out and vote. So it's not important to have members, it's not important to listen to members, it's no longer important to have internal democracy within political parties, because everything is cash and carry. While the leadership, or can we say owners, of some of these parties strove to get their parties to compete in democratic elections, they also denied or obstructed the nurturing of democracy within the parties. In many parties, financial and procedural accountability is deficient. Many hardly obey their own constitutions, and they look for shortcuts in complying with electoral laws. Many are factionalized and conflict-ridden, and not only does it translate in the politics within the party, but it also has larger implications in terms of the national politics and in terms of inter-party relations. Of course, there is then what I call a predilection in cutting corners. And we have seen this repeatedly, particularly even in our own little experience as an election management body. Virtually every party wants one way or the other to have its own way, particularly when it comes to party nomination. When it comes to party nomination, we have seen, for example, how political parties will put aside the provisions of their own constitutions, will actually substitute without reference to the democratic procedures that their own constitutions have defined for selecting candidates, and sometimes they will submit those who have emerged through the democratic process, and then they will now write to the election management body and want to withdraw those properly substituted. We have seen situations in which we have monitored party congresses, and this affected virtually every political party or most of the parties. We have records of people who emerged democratically within the primaries of the parties. But then the candidates that are sent to us, to INEC, as candidates of the party, were not, either they came third, are not number one, or in fact did not participate at all in the process. And of course, the law clearly has now become a hindrance in terms of what the Electoral Commission can do in order to ensure democracy and democratization and to entrench credibility of the electoral process. If we intervened and said that we were not going to recognize those candidates, and that was the initial instinct we had, and it guided our initial responses, then the Electoral Commission was accused of interference in the internal affairs of political parties. On the other hand, once we allowed those people that did not emerge through the democratic process to be registered, then you had series of litigations. In fact, it was instructive for some of us to discover that some parties had certain arrangements. At the time of nomination, they probably did not have what they call the good candidates. So they will line up some candidates on the understanding that as soon as they got good candidates, then those ones will submit resignation, and then there will be changes. In at least one particular major case, we had a situation in which that person that was there, when a good in court candidate was got, he refused to resign. And as soon as election ends, they still have to go to court, and of course I presume expend what has been budgeted in that regard. There is a lot of unnecessary litigation. A lot of this, of course, may be related to what I mentioned earlier on, the mutual suspicion and the fears and the assumption that a priori, whoever one must have connived with the election management bodies or its officials to distort results. Then, of course, there is exhibition of corrupt and corrupting tendencies deliberately promoted or instigated by the political parties themselves. So it's very, very important, through legislation, through behavioral changes, and through the activism of civil society organizations, we have to curb these exhibition of corrupt and corrupting tendencies in the electoral process. But let me say that some of my colleagues, political scientists and researchers, have identified a phenomenon in Nigerian politics which will take us time to win, but which perhaps to some extent explain what is happening with regards to lack of internal party democracy. I'm sure you must have heard of it, but they talk a lot, Nigerian political scientists talk a lot about what they call militations. That is the involvement of many military generals in politics. But more specifically, the negative impact of prolonged military rule in our politics. I am glad to say that we are seeing that we are winning ourselves with a lot of that. And to some extent, some of the tendencies we see about lack of internal party democracy are probably some of these inherited legacies.
Professor Jegar's paper, in a way, established a frank and blatant atmosphere as discussants pick up the mantle to lament openly the dismal condition of party politics and elections in Nigeria.
This idea of militiation is a new word. But the presenter, the lecturer, did not claim it for himself, he claimed it for his professional colleagues who are political scientists. I think we should take that word out of our political vocabulary. Let me say this, and I've seen both sides. The principles that you need to be a good military leader are the same principles that you need to be a good political leader. No difference whatsoever.
While we were being encouraged that if we so much desire to partake in the running and governance of this country, please go and drop your khaki and come and join us. That advice we have taken to. We have dropped our khaki and we are now in politics. Why then be militician? Why no loyalticians? Why no doctor-ticians and the rest of it? One issue that is really germane is to ensure that courts truly remain the bastion of democracy. People must be able to have confidence in the pronouncement of the courts of the land.
That is why I would like to urge the National Assembly to look carefully at the issue of independent candidacy. Because if the essence of governance is to throw up your best to actualize the dreams and hopes of the nation, then we must open the political space to those who may not find room within the parties. Because the parties have not so far been able to give room to all those who seek to serve genuinely.
I recall during one of the sessions of the Council of State meetings, after some long contributions at the meeting, Mr. President, who was then presiding, said, Governor Kano Shikarau, everything about you is right except in one place. I said, Your Excellency, what is that one place? He said, you belong to the wrong party. And I think he probably didn't want to say it again here. It's in the other side. I assure you, I belong to the right side of the parties. And this is why we also notice the inconsistencies in governance. even coming from the same political party. For the last couple of years, PDP has been governing Nigeria. When the President, General Obasanjo, was on board, we saw various political and economic programs. When Yar'Adua came, nobody was talking of the other economic programs. We saw the 7-point agenda. When he left, President Jonathan is no longer talking of the 7-point agenda. He's talking of transformation, whatever that meant.
It's only Catholic members of PDP that are INEC. We will never get it right. So I advocate that the constitution of INEC should be funded. Then political parties that are having representation in National Assembly should form INEC. So that if your party is sidelined or cheated, you are responsible for your party.
Leaders do not emerge transparently. Leaders of party do not emerge in an honest and transparent way, so they serve their godfathers. And in serving their godfathers, they choose the candidate of their godfathers, and the party is run with the control of the godfathers. And that is why party cannot be transparent. They have people that they have to align themselves with.
The actual problem in the country is the corruption, the inherent corruption that is persistent in all the ramifications of the country. If you ask a politician, when are you going to rebuild your house, he will tell you by a national survey. That's after an election. If you ask an INEC electoral officer who has been asked to conduct election, when is he going to change the tires of his car, he will tell you by a national survey. That's after election.
America just held the election. Council election, parliamentary election, presidential election, all in one day. We had an experience of doing elections in one day. Why don't we try that now?
I think what we need in this country is collective will of both the leadership and the followership to move this country forward. I will cite the example of what happened in the Federal House of Representatives. The leadership of this country never wanted the speaker that we have there now. But because of the collective will of the people, they knew their right. It is the right of the House to choose the leader. They stood on that.
If all candidates will not appear desperate and will not allow the electoral officers, the law enforcement agencies, to see you as a desperate candidate who would want to win by all means a do or die affair. I don't know that I'm quoting some people. Have I said anything new? The level of desperation and corruption in the electoral process need to be re-examined, and the total loss of confidence in governance. Must electorate believe that government is one thing, they are only sought for, they are only relevant on the day of the election.
I want to thank Governor Shakarau for what happened to him in Kano. What he did not know, which he may know today, is that he won that election by very narrow margin. And if I have yielded to pressure, maybe that narrow margin will have been changed.
When we set up
In a paper titled Strengthening Party Structure and Internal Democracy, Dr. Kwesilize Nwodo reflected on how internal democracy was maintained during the inception of PDP, the current ruling party. Dr. Nwodo gave details on how the PDP earlier had maintained internal democracy, sustainable funding, persistent discipline, and formidable ideology among members of the party.
this is the true party structure. We must not, and this must not be ambushed by the councillors at the ward level or at the local government level by local government party local government chairmen
or state governors at the state level, or the president at the national level. The leader of the party is the chairman of the party, and he runs the party with the executives from the national down to the world level. These executives elected on the platform of the party have their role to play, but not by interfering or hijacking the party administration or appropriating themselves the ownership of the party, as is the case in most political parties in Nigeria.
But I will say something. The CPC has only one governor or one state. My deputy national chairman is seated right there in CPC colors. And I will proudly say that since we formed that only government in Nasarawa, me as the national secretary of this party has never set my foot on Nasarawa, let alone to go and beg for contract or any, which is normal with other political parties. That is why I can look at any Nigerian straight into the face, and a lot of people will bear me witness here, and tell them my innermost mind.
We do know that in all democracies, money is a problem.
The last paper of the day was presented by Professor Samuel Ego. Professor Ego spoke on the important theme of financing political parties and elections in Nigeria. His paper centered on the degree of freedom parties have in raising funds, providing information on funds, and drawing monies from public treasury.
Because of the peculiar environment in which they operate. And the experience also shows clearly across the world that it is very difficult to police party financing. Even when you have an independent electoral commission, even when you have parliamentary ethical committees, you still have difficulty in effectively policing, financing of political parties.
Even when you end up being an elected person on the basis of these parties, the very nature of the parties that have been created by virtue of the fact that the parties are owned, as it were, by certain people, also create certain gatekeepers who make sure that even as an elected person, you are often self-auditing yourself. You are often running with a certain mentality that if you don't do things in a particular way, the people who put you there or the people who funded your emergence are going to become, are going to create some sanctions against you. And that in itself has implications for the way you create and the way you engage with your representational roles.
At the end of the first day of the conference, which centered on the party politics and elections, a number of challenges facing party administration and elections were identified. Central among them were lack of party ideology, lack of internal democracy in parties, imposition of candidates, and hijacking parties by the rich politicians.